Welcome to the Mental Advantage Podcast. Whether you're an athlete trying to perform at your best when it counts the most, a coach or business leader trying to get more out of your team, or someone looking for more personal growth, this is the place for you. This podcast is your map to guide you to the right mindset, systems, and strategies you need to become the best version of yourself. And now, here's John Cullen and Brandon Allen.
Hey, so the guest tonight, you're going to be pretty happy, right? Because he's a Cincinnati Reds guy.
Yes. It's no surprise to anybody who knows me that the first mental skills coach from the major leagues that we would get on would be from the Cincinnati Reds. So,
well, it's appropriate because for the longest time they were the first team that always had their opening day game, right?
That's right.
Hopefully this will go much better than the time that you and I met Pete Rose down in Florida.
You mean the time that you almost ruined my encounter with my childhood hero? Is that the way you remember that story?
I don't know how you remember it. It apparently sounds like you remember it that way. I remember that one of my dudes, my college roommate, who was enamored with this guy, was getting ready to be denied an autograph. And if I remember right, I maybe was a little aggressive. Maybe. That's up for debate. I don't know why you're laughing. It's completely up for debate. Yeah. I may have aggressively reminded Pete that you were one of his biggest fans, and he just needed to sign what we had put in front of him.
That whole thing was such a funny memory for me because, we were playing when we were at the College of Charleston. For people listening to this, we're playing Florida Atlantic, and in Boca Raton, Pete had the ballpark cafe, and I just remember right away finding out oh, okay, this is great. He's got this place we could go. And I remember Tony Schufo coming into our hotel room and being like, hey guys, John, you'll be really happy. We're eating at Pete Rose's ballpark cafe tonight. And I was like, what? I don't think I could think of much else after that. And it was a nice break from Ryan's or whatever, we were
Well, if I remember right too, he had a radio show, and at the top and bottom of every hour where the big breaks are typically in radio shows, he came out to sign. So we caught him at one of those times, and we got some stuff signed.
Yeah. No, it was one of I still have that card, so I'm glad you stepped in because
you're welcome.
I didn't realize at the time that you had to pay for something for him to sign. And I remember just being like, I have this ticket. And Pete was like, the other funny thing about this story,
what you had was a cup, right? You had a cup, and he had an assistant, and the assistant said, what would you like? Pointing to one of the, $25, $30 baseballs that were up on the shelf. And I said, if we wanted a baseball sign, I'd walk my ass out to the bleeping bus, and I'd grab a pearl from underneath it, and I'd bring it in. We're not paying $30 to have Pete sign.
First of all, who are you kidding? There was no pearls underneath it. We had already used all those things up. But no, that's it's a funny thing because I remember the other thing about that encounter was Pete was, as he was signing, he was having conversation with us in the line, and I'm sitting there. He's talking about the Reds game that day, and I'm sitting there nodding at everything he's saying and smiling like, oh yeah, no, you're right, Pete. I agree, Pete. And he finally looks up at me. He's like, did you see the game? And I had not watched the game. Of course, we were playing. Right. And so I had to lie. I thought, well, do I either lie to my childhood hero or do I just tell the truth? And I remember telling the truth and being like, no, I didn't see the game. And he had to be thinking like, what an idiot this kid is. So he just sits here and has this conversation and doesn't doesn't even know what happened in the game, didn't watch it. So anyhow, we are, as Brandon mentioned, excited, to have Andy Riise on the show tonight, who is the mental skills coach for the Cincinnati Reds. But Andy's so much more than that. I mean, what a story. You talk about somebody who has just squeezed so much out of life already.
And he's so young. I mean, he's a young dude that has just accomplished and he's so humble for all the things that he's been able to do thus far. And it's amazing to have someone like that that's willing to put himself out there, both for his country and now for the folks that employ him and for everybody, as he's helping veterans, as he's helping young men and women develop and from a mental performance standpoint. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better guy to be on the front line. So
the definition of a servant leader, he really
absolutely.
Is. He's the definition of a servant leader. So enjoy this interview with Andy Riise, and we will talk to you all next week. Brandon, let's welcome to the show tonight Andy Riise. And Andy is let me tell you something. I know the last time I was saying about introductions that sometimes I feel like, it's going to take me a little while. When I do this introduction, I feel like we should do bumper music, like before the introduction and then after.
Well, the intro almost deserves 2 episodes in and of itself.
Oh, I mean, you talk about something. All right, here goes. Listen to this, guys. So retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, who is a mental skills coach for the Cincinnati Reds Major League Baseball Club. Andy's a West Point graduate, former Army football player who spent over 20 years leading soldiers, including multiple combat tours to Iraq and Afghanistan, and 5 years with 2 elite special forces units. So that in itself, like, I would be like, you know what, check, please. I'm good. Right. That was good. So then from there, he taught performance psychology and leadership at West Point, the Air Force Academy, Texas A&M. He's also the owner-operator of Design to Perform and co-author of the best-selling book, Deliberate Discomfort, How U.S. Special Operations Forces Overcome Fear and Dare to Win by Getting Comfortable Being Uncomfortable. I mean...
And he's younger than us, and he's got a lot more to go.
Showing off at this point, just completely showing off. Andy, welcome to the show, my friend.
Guys, it's I'm beyond humbled to be with you, and thank you for considering me a guest. And believe me, it's called Lipstick on a Pig, guys. And, I am not my bio, that's for sure. I've failed so many times I can't even tell you. So just really, I'm a coach and a servant leader, man. I'm like you guys. I just want to help people get better at what they do. So thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it's interesting about that not defining you, because we're going to get into some of that. But that's what really appealed to us about your story as you start to look at some of these different levels as I've told you before, is when you think about deliberate discomfort. I mean, the title of the book and all these different things. I mean, we'll hear where you've almost kind of inadvertently put yourself into a lot of these situations that you've had to be uncomfortable. And so we'll definitely get into that. But first of all, thank you for your service. Number one, I think it's absolutely outstanding. That all of the things that you've been able to do, and the fact that you say, servant leadership, you've just been able to continue to give back the way you have. So let's first talk about this. How does a boy from Oakdale, California, end up all the way over at West Point?
Yeah, it's how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of a great question. How much time we have? Very carefully.
Yeah.
So, middle of California, Central Valley. It's not your typical California, small cow town. That's why I'm very at home here in Texas, where I live now with my wife and 4 kids. And I had a great childhood. I mean, I really did. And I'm not telling my therapist about how bad my childhood was. Believe me, I had a great childhood. Playing sports. My first love was baseball. I mean, just like you guys, playing soccer, playing Pop Warner football, and basketball, and all those things. And I was really big into scouting. I'm an Eagle Scout, and I'm really proud about that. That's where I cut my teeth in leadership. So I spent a lot of time in the outdoors, and this is an amazing environment. on the coast of California and in the Sierra Nevada mountains. And I didn't really think of myself as a military family, but my sister would end up serving in Desert Storm along with her late husband. And that's what really inspired me to join the Army.
Wow. So what was it that, you talk about a lot with some of those experiences you had at West Point? I mean, I know one of the things as a football player, you had to switch positions. Then when you start looking at just the active duty service, I mean, the tours you took to Iraq and Afghanistan, I've heard you say, and it was written down where, combat is the truest test of mental toughness, right? What was it about that made it that way for you?
Yeah, for sure. So just to kind of continue, to answer your question in the narrative form, is that my brother-in-law was killed in 1994, and I had to change schools. That was probably big trigger event number one in terms of adversity. Mm-hmm. It ended up being a great move for me because I ended up going into a football program where I really started to blossom and take off. I wasn't recruited by a bunch of Pac-10 schools, as it were then. But as fate would have it, all these friends of my late brother-in-law and my sister would come back and I would meet them. And they really were guys that I wanted to be like. And guys like Eric Schmacher and Brother Ratliff, shout out to Brother and his family, played football at West Point in 1988. And then he helped get me recruited. I mean, he sent my VHS tape and to a guy named Mike Sullivan, who's there now and won a bunch of Super Bowls with the Giants. I ended up getting recruited, and I ended up going to preparatory school first, and then again struggled again. I'm now 17, going all the way across the country. Most people would stay at home. I didn't even know what West Point was, and I'm joining the Army, and I just really struggled. I mean, I didn't take math my entire senior year. But I'm going to the hardest engineering school in the country, right? Who does that? And so,
right.
To me, that was something that my parents believed in me. I believed in myself, and I was moving into gunfire pretty early, But in this case, academically, I barely got into West Point. I didn't get admitted to West Point until the very last day. I was actually planning on going back and walking on to Fresno State. My parents were making plans for me to come home. I was going to come home with my tails tucked between my legs, and then I get a last minute stay of execution. I get my appointment to West Point, and I will say that. That's important because none of this, I would not be here had it not been for that moment. But that was just, it was just the beginning, because then I go through this 47-month crucible experience as West Point that just beats you down, and it does it on purpose. And, you just build these calluses of who you are. It's very Spartan on purpose. And you have these collective experiences that make you really damn tough. And there's a reason why Angela Duckworth studied grit there, And so, but she wasn't studying me because I wasn't very gritty. And that's why, like you said, I switched positions. I couldn't get out of my own way. Very typical, like how we find sport. You get stuck, right? So I couldn't, things like composure under extreme circumstances, confidence despite setbacks, concentration amidst distraction, motivation. I mean, my goal orientation was there. My motivation was there, but the things that, winning the argument between my ears was very difficult. And so a coach at the time referred me to a very unique center called the Center for Enhanced Performance at West Point. It's it's really the epicenter of where sports psychology comes into the military. It was started in 1989. So it's full tilt by the time I'm there in the mid 90s. And I didn't know it at the time because I was in survival mode,
right?
But I was learning these mental skills that are so near and dear to us and to your audience as they learn about it. And so I'm being inculcated with these mental skills. It's helping me on the football field. It's helping me in the classroom. It's helping me militarily because everyone's trained to become a military officer. But you guys remember, because you're in college just a little ahead of me. It's the 90s. We're not at war.
Yeah.
Right. Well, guess what? I graduate, and then 9/11 happens. I meet my soon-to-be wife and the woman that I'm in love with and I want to marry. And so all these things start to happen really rapidly, right? And then our focus is pivoted very, very quickly, right? And there's a lot of people who joined the military after 9/11. Well, I didn't do that. And so to be in the military during that time, and then all of a sudden we got to pivot on a dime, your sense of purpose changes. But the way we trained had not caught up with what we needed to do mission-wise overseas, right? We were still very much focused on our training like we did during the wars in the Balkans and even during Desert Storm, which is a very linear fight. So now we're all of a sudden, getting in a very temporary linear fight to where we have overwhelming superior firepower. I was a part of that. I was leading 30 men into combat, a 500-man convoy in March. I'm 22 years old. My brain isn't even fully cooked yet. And, I have no business leading anybody but myself. But here I am leading, a 500-person convoy into Baghdad, Iraq. And then very quickly, once we thought we won, now the enemy's not fighting fair, and I think that's when I really realized now we were not prepared. We were not trained for making the adjustments to where the enemy was fighting us asymmetrically, meaning, it became a cat and mouse. They were using our technology and to our disadvantage, right? They're using roadside bombs. They're moving within the people, and we didn't know who was a friend or foe. And we didn't have armor built on it, so we're throwing sandbags and retrofitting steel onto our vehicles, and and I just think the mental pivots that we had to make there, and the stress of not knowing where the enemy was going to come from, let alone how to then be able to make those adjustments and those decisions. I fell back on my mental training more than anything. I think my mental, emotional, and my social skills more than anything, and then you come home and you're changed. I mean, as a human being. And I think I kind of realized that, hey, we got to fundamentally change how we go about doing our business, right? Not only physically, and tactically and technically, but we have to mentally, socially, spiritually get ready for combat. And so I did that again. And my second tour was even harder because now I'm a combat advisor to the Iraqi army. I'm living, I barely knew my 12 teammates there's a need to be, we had to stand the Iraqi army up so that we could come home. Right. And so,
right.
We're now, this is 2008, so we're now 7 years into the war. We're fighting 2 wars on different fronts. By and large, there's a point in the war where we were losing. And so this is kind of on the uptick of that again. And I'm going to the hottest place in terms of combat activity in the country up in northern Iraq and Mosul, Iraq. I'm not a combat advisor. I've never trained, advised, and assisted anybody. But hey, I'm going to throw you guys together with 12 guys, and we're going to go train for 3 months in Fort Riley, Kansas, and then we're going to send you into the fire, right? Hey, good luck. Does that sound like I was uncomfortable, man?
Yeah.
Again, I'm finding myself, I'm having to get out of my comfort zone and having to grow really, really fast in this high stress pressure cooker environment. And, but I feel I've always had a lot of pride of being a gamer, and I feel like, made adjustments. And, but again, I mean, the mental part of combat was at a premium. And so, how do you build trust and rapport with somebody where you don't speak the same language? How do you train them on the fundamentals of how to shoot, move, and communicate, and helping them build confidence themselves and build capacity in themselves, which they didn't have. And you're doing that through an interpreter. And, but I look back on it and I fall back on those skills now, in terms of what I do as a coach. That was my first foray into coaching.
Yeah.
And so, and I'll pause there, but then I got the opportunity to go back to teach at West Point, that same center. And that's where really the lights came on.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm curious. So as all of that's going on and you had an introduction, through football and athletics at West Point to have some of that mental, performance, bestowed upon you. How do you, especially at the age of 22 and having the responsibility that you do, and realizing too, Andy, that like you said, we weren't trained for what we saw. So from a mental perspective, we'll use a sports analogy. You're training for football, and all of a sudden they decide we're going to play soccer. How do you apply with those men and women that are serving? How do you kind of get their mind right to say, hey, here's what we need to do, and here's how we adjust? And were you able to leverage some of the stuff that you learned in that mental performance early on? I
think early on it was really fundamental things, like, having to do with values and purpose. I think that was something you fall back on, and say, hey, we don't rise the level of our expectations. We follow our level of training, right? So there's fundamental things that are baseline to that, and I think your physical, mental, your physical, technical, and tactical piece, that's kind of the baseline that you fall to. So then how does your mental game then allow you to then be able to make adjustments anticipate the adjustments that you need to make that are unseen variables in combat that you didn't train for on home station, right? Mm-hmm. So the way that I look at it is like how you make adjustments in real time, and to compare the preparation and the adjustments you need to make. I mean, let's compare it to football, right? So, football, great coordinators, the difference between great ones and just good ones and just average ones is their ability to then be able to pivot in real time and make adjustments, right? So like an average coordinator will make adjustments at halftime, right? A good coordinator will make adjustments, probably about halfway or, by the quarter, right? But the guys like Belichick and Bill Walsh and those guys, they're seeing what you're doing and they're making pivots in real time, right? Yep. And so I think the anticipation is understanding that too, and being open to being open to what the enemy is giving you, and then understanding your operating environment is super important. And you guys heard my talk with Greg Williams and Brian Marion with the Left or Greg podcast. And I think what they taught in terms of situational awareness, in terms of and weaponizing the human brain, was really the deliberate act of understanding what my operating environment is in terms of what is normal, what's not normal. And like going through a village and at the same time every single day where there's a bustling market, and to where, I tend to see the same street vendors every single day. Maybe I take a different route, but if I go through there and then all of a sudden, what's the anomaly? All of a sudden the people are not there, and so I have this intuitive sense of what my eyes and ears are telling me. How does that inform me as a leader or as a soldier to decide what I need to do? Right. Right. Sometimes we're in that dissonance and, that cognitive dissonance moments where we don't sit with that and we just move forward. And I think sometimes you have to training yourself to trust your instincts is super important, and sitting with that, creating space, right, to embrace that dissonance, to make decisions that are going to either keep you alive and assume risk, or that you need to make adjustments in real time. Those little things are the things that make the difference in when you're in combat in an unconventional warfare setting.
So let me ask you this question, because now that you're in the baseball arena, I'll put it to you in this way. I had a college coach who used to always talk about the dirt principle. So the dirt principle is when you're sitting in the stands watching a baseball game, it is going at a snail's pace. I mean, some people might even say it's boring. We would never say that, but some people who or the average fan might say it's boring. When you move to the dugout and even the coaches' boxes, it speeds up a little bit more. But when you're between those white lines, it's a very fast game, and people don't realize that. Even though it seems like a slow-paced game, it's just because you're watching really high-level athletes play this game.
That's right.
I kind of think about this in your regard with this combat training that you had at a very young age, is as you look back and reflect on this now, Andy, through the lens, though, of a mental skills coach, through the lens of somebody who's been teaching some of these things at all of the different places, whether that was at Texas A&M or at West Point. Do you recognize now certain pain points, certain things that, I wish I could go back and be my Andy, the mental skills coach now, and lead that unit, because this would make all the difference in the world? How would you have done it differently?
That's a great question. And I really appreciate you giving me time to reflect on that, because, overnight, because I haven't thought about that in a long time. So thank you for that question. What I settled on was expectations, right? And so something I've been talking about with a great friend of mine, his name's Tim Chachi Pachasa. He's a shout out to Chachi. And so he is a phenomenal, first of all, he's a senior non-commissioned officer, which is the backbone of our military, fellow JTAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller, guys who jump out of airplanes and help special forces guys put warheads on foreheads. And so he's a guy who's just this full of sage wisdom, and he described expectations beautifully, right? And I think this is really important for your listeners. Expectations are a belief that something's going to happen based on two things. One, those things is that, it's based on credible information, right? And the other one is based on relative experience. And so for me, when I think about the expectations if I had that definition, first of all, what I expected of myself would change, right? because I operated off a lot of assumptions, and maybe that was just sheer dumb luck because I just was a fullback in every sense of the mean. I was just going to create a hole, bring your own block, reckless abandon, aggressive as all hell. And that's how I found a lot of success in that too. But what I found is that when I made mistakes or I really struggled, I was so hard on myself, and so hard on myself, and I didn't have a short memory, and I couldn't get over it, and I ruminated, and I just wallowed. So it's great. Like, I have a really good built-in self-assessment tool. I after action review the shit out of what I do.
Yeah.
What did I do well? What I need to sustain? What I need to do well? What was supposed to happen? What did happen?
Yeah.
But that can be very unhealthy, right? Because I didn't filter things out. Instead of it being one time, one thing, it was all the time, everything. It became personal and pervasive. So yeah, I looked like I was resilient because I moved forward, but did I, was I that much better? Could I bounce back faster and even better than I was before? Had I been able to understand what expectations are and then demonstrate some self-compassion. And then that's me from the personal standpoint. From a professional standpoint, I'll take the same lens of expectations from a leader perspective. And I taught one of the things that I used to teach junior leaders who are going into kind of their mid-level experience in my last assignment in the military was about trust. And I'll use the Bob Rotella thing about training yourself to trust yourself and then trusting yourself to train yourself, right? Mm. And training yourself to trust yourself is then building, bringing skill in, and then trusting is letting it out, right? And so training your swing, letting your swing out. How do you do that as a leader? Well, I think you have to train yourself to trust yourself from a confidence standpoint, and in terms of what your knowledge, skills, and experience are. But how do you train yourself to trust others, right? And by taking that leap, and I referenced Paul Zak and a lot of his research on trust, and I think expectations are really, really important. I think it's really missing in corporate and sports. We don't do initial counseling. One of the great things with the military is we do a lot of counseling where we talk about our goals and our expectations, right? But unfortunately, it's very unidirectional. It's not a conversation. So I think this is where coaching comes in. So what I would tell junior leaders is to use a stoplight model, right? And so in terms of leading expectations, so everyone has heard someone at some point in time in their life say, hey, well, manage your expectations. Well, what the hell does that mean? Right? And so what that means is, I think, it's a couple things, so I think it's, what do you expect of your people in terms of their attitudes and behaviors, right? And then you got to do that within your first 30 days of coming in as a leader, as a coach. You got to lay the foundation down and counsel them, whether it's a group or one-on-one. If you're a coach, you better do it with your subordinate coaches, because there's going to be a lot less in transition. Because the number one point of friction is going to happen when expectations are unmet. Yep. And the research supports that. So I'd be happy to get into that green light, that stoplight model. I can break that down if you guys want to.
Yeah, absolutely. And before you do that, though, there's one thing I just wanted to add to what you just said, because I think it's so critical. One of the things I do as a business leader, anytime I'm taking over a new team, is one of the things I ask is always, what do you expect of me, and what do you think I expect of you? Because those are two questions that, if we can get that out on the table right now, we're going to be a lot better off to move forward, because there is no unclear expectation. So tell us a little bit more about that stoplight model would be great.
Yeah, it's so, and I kind of borrowed that from Reviz a little bit. Shout out to Heads Up Baseball, right? I mean, it's the Bible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Green light, gospel, yellow light. Yeah. The
gospel according to Ken, rest his soul. So, but this is kind of in terms of expectations, right? And so a lot of times what happens is, like, when we come in, so you're having a conversation, it's about the red lights, about the behaviors that you don't want. And like in the military, and I think the same thing would apply to sports, is like, you're talking about the things that get you fired, right? And so in the military, I talk about, we would have before a long weekend, we'd have a formation. We call it accountability. And usually the leader, would get up there and talk about it. And the things they would always talk about are, what to not do. So, and so, hey, don't beat your spouse. Do not do drugs. Don't drink and drive. And essentially, and we know how the brain works. The brain doesn't really understand do and do not. So essentially what you've done is you prime the pump to all the behaviors that you don't want.
Yep.
So can you imagine, it's like, hey, can you imagine going to the rifle range and telling people, hey, don't miss that target, right?
Yeah.
But essentially leaders and coaches, we do that all day, every day, because we don't know how to communicate effectively. And so I think, so what I like to do is all those lights are not equal. The green lights, if you want to create an environment that has psychological safety, your green light has to be huge, because you're creating, in terms of, what I want you to do and what I don't want you to do. Hey, I want you to show up at work, at a certain time. And then the enhancer is why, so it's not the what, but the why is really the enhancer and the optimizer in that case, because, people will do almost anything when you tell them why, and then you create an environment where people can make mistakes. And I want to differentiate between mistakes and failure, because it's very common now to say like, okay, well, you got to fail. Look, there's a difference between mistakes and failure, and not all failure is created equal, right? So let's face it, because there's consequences, right? So if you lie, you cheat, steal, you do something illegal, unethical, like that's going to get you fired, right? And so those are the red light behaviors, but that should be very small. The yellow light thing is, okay, here's the things that they're going to do, going to cause us to have some concern, right? Because you're a human being, you're going to make mistakes, and we want you to make mistakes and learn from them. But however, if you continue to do these things over and over again, we're going to have a discussion, and that's the yellow light, right? And that should be kind of a medium size, and the red light should be kind of small. And so I think if you're able to do that conceptually and then deliver that and have a crucial conversation at some point in time early on, and then reinforce those attitudes and behavior at interval, but also on a daily basis, I think it makes it more likely than not that expectations are going to be met instead of unmet.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really important as you start talking about expectations, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, was the importance of word choice and the importance of making sure that as you're laying these things out there, that the person you're communicating with understands exactly what words you're using and why you're using those words, and kind of really be clear about that. So that's something else I think the listeners need to be mindful of. So as you think, Andy, about looking back kind of on those combat experiences as well, one of the things I know has been a pain point when we've asked for audience, feedback and that type of thing is always the negative self-talk, and it's the doubt and all those things. And I got to believe that when you're out there, whether it's in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever, and probably even many times as a 22-year-old leader, you have that negative, doubt and negative self-talk. But the reality of it is, as a leader, you can't really be letting anybody else see that. So how did you kind of work through some of those things? And maybe as you look back, what are some ways you would recommend now doing it?
No, it's a great question, because I think that there's a misconception that, there's like soldiers were robotic, and we're not aware of the socio-political climate, and let's face it. I mean, there were times during, especially after we found out there wasn't WMDs or whatever, they were like, you're going over there and you're like, why the hell am I here?
Yeah.
And that, because we're human, and you would ask yourself, and you're like, especially when I was training the Iraqi army, I'm like, because they're not us. And again, the expectations were they're going to be like us. And so when they weren't meeting our expectations, there's friction there. And so and so their motivation level, their discipline level, their motor wasn't the same as ours, but we projected that on them. And so we got frustrated really early, and we're like, screw these guys, and then there's a thing in the back of your head, like there's 12 of us, 11 at any given time, because there was always somebody rotating home. And I missed the birth of my son when I was there, and I was pissed off, and I got depressed, and I was like, I missed the birth of my son, for these guys, that's why I thought to myself, and that was a lot of negative self-talk. And I was felt so much guilt for not being there for my wife. And I was like, cause I felt like any given day I didn't trust these guys, and they could put a bullet in my head. And we always had a contingency plan for when these guys were supposed to be coaching, essentially your combat coach, we're going to turn around and shoot us in the head, and that had happened. Right. So that's in the back of your mind. Right. And I think, but again, understanding, that there was a process to this, and understanding what the end goal was super important. I think this is kind of where the Stockdale paradox comes in for your listeners, that and I really leaned heavily on Marcus Aurelius. I learned heavily on Stockdale. That's when I started exploring, guys like Viktor Frankl, because the purpose and the process was more important than the outcome. The outcome still mattered. Like, let's face it. And I deal with this in baseball. It's not process versus outcome.
Right.
Because the results freaking matter, man. Like, when you're at war, you're fighting to win. When you're playing baseball, you're freaking trying to win, man.
Absolutely.
And so, like, we're not here to fuck around. We're here to win. And so, like, don't tell me winning doesn't matter. So what does winning mean how do you quantify winning when you're working with a foreign army? Well, the winning meant that we weren't replaced, and that we would, and that we worked ourselves out of a job. And how ironic that every mental performance coach how great would it be if we could all work ourselves out of a job?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
So right now, as you're, starting, so you come back from, you're still active duty. You're still doing all these things. Tell me about
I'm retired.
Now you are. I'm saying, but back at this stage in the game, how did you get involved with, involved with the book and starting that whole process with Mission 60 and some of those, because that was the next step right after.
It was. So when I came back from combat, I had this amazing opportunity to go back to West Point and teach. I was going to get out of the military. My wife was over it. I was on this endless cycle of deployment, and so I just needed to take a knee. Normally, like, officers, when they go back to West Point to teach or an academy, they go get a master's degree. And because at West Point, they would send officers to some great schools. So the Dr. Doug Chadwick, who works for the Rockies, shout out to Doug if you're listening. Army Football Brothers, it's all about the network, right? Send it out to the bro net, and hey, anybody want to come back to West Point? I'm like, hell yeah, send. And so, and then lo and behold, the guy who comes full circle, remember that captain I told you with when I worked with as a football player? Well, now he's a colonel and a PhD. And so he studied under Rotella. Now he's studying under Uke at Penn State. He's a PhD now. He's like, yeah, I remember Riise. Bring him back. So, here I am, no master's degree. I got a lot of personal experience. And then, I just really fell in love with the field. Dr. Bernie Holiday, who's incredible. I mean, I've walked with giants in so many ways. And I feel so blessed to have done that. And Bernie's one of them. Dr. Nate Zinser's another one. I got a master's on the job training.
Right.
I was learning from the best. And then they were asking me, because I just come from combat, and it was cool because the military was adopting this holistic approach to fitness, because it was starting in response to the suicides. We lost more soldiers due to suicide at that time in 2009 than we had lost in both wars. So it was an epidemic. Wow. And I found myself in this kind of group we called a Tiger Team, this group of experts that were we were called down to the University of Pennsylvania, and a bunch of generals and PhDs and experts in the field. And I'm little Captain Riise, and I'm like, hi, what am I doing here? I'm like, hey, I think I'm in the wrong room. They're like, no, get over here. Get over here. You represent, the tactical level soldier. You just came back from combat. Sit down.
Yeah.
So, I'm working with Marty Seligman and Karen Rivich. I mean, giants in the field of psychology, and we're taking this resilience curriculum that, had some efficacy with 5th and 6th grade populations in the elementary school that teachers taught students. And then I was translating that to the military, became one of the first resilience trainers in the Army. And then it just really started taking off from there too. So I really got this crash course in positive psychology, performance psychology, especially as applied to the military. But then it became another challenge, another pivot point. Okay, I'm 10 years in. Do I want to stay or do I want to go? I still wanted to serve, but I wanted to learn how to. I knew I wanted to do this someday. So how do I do that? And there's no path. I'm still a field artillery officer, right? And so I decided to go work with elite populations. I wanted to work with them. The Special Forces community was really adopting the sports model that you and I that we're familiar with, and they were bringing in practitioners from pro and collegiate sports and the Olympic level. And that multidisciplinary approach with, from the strength and conditioning, the sports science, the nutrition, the sleep, and then on the psychology side, it was, we had the behavioral health providers in place, but they didn't have mental performance coaches. So my day job was to, like I said, jump out of airplanes and help Green Berets put warheads on foreheads. But then I was a mental performance coach on the side because Green Berets they're elite tactical athletes. They're hardwired the same way that baseball players are.
Right.
And they want to get better. They want that edge, and they understand how important the mental game is, and they want to get after that. So, here I am. I found myself an opportunity to where I could go coach them, and I could go get my master's and take what I learned, my master's degree, and apply it to Green Berets. And then not only taking Green Berets at home station, I was helping them do mental training, while they were in combat. And that was just an amazing experience that I don't take for granted.
Is the whole idea behind Deliberate Discomfort for both the book and the program that people can go to? You mentioned Marcus Aurelius earlier and the Stoics. I mean, that there's a lot of information for those of us that follow the Stoics of, really preparing yourself, putting yourself in difficult situations so that it becomes easier when you're in those situations. Right. I imagine that part of that program that you all were all in the room, one of those rooms where you, like you said, you look around and you're like, am I in the right room? Was really, hey, if we can get these soldiers more comfortable in those uncomfortable situations, right, and more, number one, we're building resilience, but we're also maybe helping them from a mental standpoint, understand, okay, the exit strategy to this is not suicide, for example, or, you know what I mean? Right. Is that kind of the theory behind some of that?
It is. Basically the idea was, how do we export these best practices to other arenas? And so I was still saying the reason I got involved in Mission 60, I didn't answer your question previously, was, because I had to stay relevant in sports still outside of the military. As we know, even to be certified to be a CNPC, you got to have a certain number of hours working with athletic populations. And so I was always seeking outlets to do that. And so my buddy, Jason Van Camp, who I played football with at West Point, was getting his MBA at the time, had this idea that, hey, how do we bring in, how do we take the best practices of special forces assessment, selection, and training and bring that to sports and the corporate world? And, Jason's an unstoppable force. So it's no surprise to me why the New York Jets were our first client, and so, and that was just an amazing experience. And we started off kind of these big, high overhead, really tactical, immersive environment. So the idea was to immerse them in stress, and to get them out of their comfort zones in order to be able to learn about themselves, learn about their teammates, and then learn tactics and strategies that they can go then export or they can import into their business or into their team. And I think that at the time we weren't really deliberately getting after some behavioral science practices, but as the watershed moment for us was in we did a situational awareness reaction exercise. That was an individual lane where we created, it was an individual lane where Rex Ryan went through it the first time. And I'll never forget this. And I'm his lane walker with a clipboard behind him, right? And he had a series of stations where he had to stop, so he got overwhelmed. We overwhelmed him with a bunch of information, right, that he had to retain. And then he had to go navigate, and meanwhile we're at Woody Johnson's farm, out in the middle of New Jersey, right? It's beautiful, and so he had to go meet a tribal leader who was a person who was in costume and, and negotiate and then, do all this stuff too. And then there was a moral and ethical dilemma. And then he had to get in a rowboat and go out to the island, and he got slapped by, and so, I mean, we just created all these curveballs to where we were assessing, how well they did. And it's based on, loosely based on what Green Beret officers go through, because Jason had remembered when he went through Special Forces Assessment and Selection and then through the qualification course, he went through this and he said, I learned so much about myself. Like, how can we export this? And so that's where it started. And out of all the cool things that we were doing that day, that included we're doing, we're doing airsoft. We're all kitted up. They were entering, clearing buildings. They were, doing all kinds of physical tasks. I mean, and these were coaches one day and the next day was players. And we were doing this with wounded warriors who were telling these amazing stories, and it just was full tilt. And the one thing that highlighted the whole event was this SARE event. And I think at the time that Jason was like, look, this is where it's at. This psychological component of this training is what people need. And how can we train harder than we actually perform in our day job. And I felt like there was something to that stress inoculation, and then embracing the suck, but not sucking for suck's sake, but sucking with a purpose.
With a purpose, right.
So,
and I think it's interesting too, because you even see it some of the different levels today of moms and dads and kids that maybe weren't athletes. I think, the three of us can relate to this. The things that you remember are the suffering with your team and the trust that builds, right? So to your point, Andy, the embracing the suck, and you look at things today that are successful, CrossFit gyms, some of these group exercises, what is it, exit rooms or whatever, where you're put in stressful situations, and you leave those places and you feel like, man, I want to talk with these people again. I want to be around these people again. It creates this sense of community immediately, and which I would imagine in a team environment, obviously that is a huge thing, especially early on. But even to your point about soldiers, that you hear those stories of those guys that they've got to go back, not because they want to go back. Right. They miss that camaraderie. And it's the one thing that athletes, when they retire, I mean, nobody says, oh, I miss going to practice. Right. They miss being in the locker room. They miss traveling together. They miss that suffering together. That gives you that sense. And it's interesting that our brains are wired that way, that we in a way, we really, really crave that.
We do. It's, I call them the calluses of the mind. And I think that we're designed to really lean into those difficult experiences. And again, it's the threat versus opportunity thing. And so if we could reframe the way that we see difficult experiences as opportunities to get better, and again, sit with that dissonance, and make the choices that, okay, so what's happening to me and why is it happening to me, and really reflecting on that. And then, but also leaning on others for perspective, I think is really important. And, I think what's really important for coaches and leaders to understand is that, those experiences are great, but ultimately, you have to be willing to bring them in yourself and then reinforce them to your coaches and your people in your company. Because look, I mean, the consultant model is just really, really limited.
Yeah.
And so I think we're all coaches and leaders are psychologists, in some, whether you like it or not. The mental game is happening whether you like it or not.
Right.
And so what I would like to see is, I like those experiences. I think they're great culminating events, but I would like to see more microdosing happen, and more coaches getting the opportunity to learn about the mental game and then how to train it in their own way using their own language. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that you talked about. I want you to, while you're on the subject, just go into a little bit, is the importance, and we talked about this, training the trainers, the importance of teaching these coaches, these business leaders, everybody, I know that's something that you're passionate about wanting to get started. I mean, it's something you were doing, in some regards. You think about at Texas A&M as that program as far as, the Veterans to Coaching initiative. Yeah. So talk a little bit about that, if you would, as far as, the idea of coaching the coach, because I think it is a really important thing.
Yeah, I'm so passionate about coaching, guys. I know you are too, and you guys are coaches, and both in business and in sports and with your kids and everything else too. And I think that's kind of where it's at. And I think the role of the coach is a really noble profession, right? And I think that they're some of the most important people in terms of the development of young people, and they're the most underserved and under-trained and educated people. And I think the art and science of coaching, it's not deliberate and intentional, right? It's ironic to me that teachers need to be credentialed in order to be able to do their job, but a coach who's a volunteer is not trained and certified as well too. So I think, and again, but there's also a huge shortage of coaches that are out there. Like in Texas, we lose, a delta of 6,000 a year. And so Texas A&M decided they were going to step up and help fill that gap, especially in our underprivileged areas, like along the Rio Grande River, and provide a resource, be a relevant, responsive resource as, an education center that was primarily focusing on helping undergrads and grads get into coaching and find pathways to do that. Just like you guys experienced in your story, like, hey, okay, I got this kinesiology degree. It's my junior year. What the hell do I do now? Okay. Well, so that's why they existed. But then the outreach part came in and they brought me on to help out with that. Because in order to meet the need, Texas is one of the largest places where veterans land for obvious reasons. I mean, there's so many benefits and reasons why to live here. It is a great place to live. And so, like Houston, the greater Houston area is quickly going to become the largest concentration of veterans in America. So we have this ready population who has all this incredible leadership experience in and out of combat, who have this foundation to go be coaches, who need a purpose and want to find a calling, and want to find a tribe. And there's so many similarities between the military and sport. And so we thought maybe we could build a bridge there. And so we started doing that, the Veterans of Coaching program. But fundamentally, I think where the mental game comes in is that I think this idea of this holistic approach to developing the coach from the inside out, right? The mind, body, spirit, or the mind, body, team, character, and craft. And you guys know that coaches tend to gravitate towards, the X's and O's, which is the craft. Now, more, the physical side, the strength and conditioning, a lot of the team. But there's two missing pieces, and one's character and one is the mind. And so I was really helping develop their content and curriculum so coaches can get certified and start to get educated within their busy schedule so they could do it online. They can come back to school if they want to. And then we also have a partner with a nonprofit called Soldiers of Sidelines that I'd like to advocate because they're really doing it right and have an amazing network where they're helping veterans get into coaching and fill this incredible need that we need for our young people across this country, especially now.
I think that's outstanding. It's a really, there's a void there, and you hit it right on the head where you said we're preparing. Coaches are really good with all of those, X's and O's piece, but if we can get them to where they're training this on a consistent basis, and now all of a sudden, because the reason we all played sports and the impact it had on our lives, the three of us just here on this call, is tremendous because it teaches you so many life lessons. And so if you can get coaches that are being able to help players better self-assess, better be able to deal with some of the challenges they're facing from a mental standpoint that sports teaches you. Wow. I mean, you're building better fathers, you're building better business people in the long run. And I think it has all kinds of potential in the world. I can't believe that I have spent this long in this podcast and have not talked about the Cincinnati Reds.
Right. Yeah. That's great.
I mean, look.
Go Reds!
Yeah, I mean, I have a brother-in-law who's a big Reds fan, and one of my bosses that I used to work for is a big Reds fan. And both of them I can hear right now yelling at whatever they're listening to this on, like, ask me about the Reds. Quit talking about all this other stuff. So tell me about the Reds. How did that all come to be?
Yeah, man, I'm so proud to be a Red for the reason that you talked about too. Like the majority of these guys we're working with. They're not going to make it to the big league, or maybe they'll have a cup of coffee or become pros or Hall of Famers. But we're making better men because they're Reds. Period. Yeah. Awesome. And I mean, what a great mission to be a part of, and developing these young men and working with them because they're just like the soldiers. They're the same guys. They just happen to be soldiers joined the military, and these guys just happen to be pretty good at the 5 tools, right? And so. But there's the same people where the biggest need is. I'm working with the minor leagues. My colleague, Tyler Klein, Dr. Tyler Klein, shout out to him if he's listening, is helping he's leading us on the major league side. And I just think we're building something special in Cincinnati, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a part of it, because I had other options. And the reason I went with the Reds is because they're building a culture, right? And they want to do it right. And they're interdisciplinary and they're applied. And they want to do things right. And, they embody the soft truths, which is quality is more important than quality, that humans are more important than hardware. Mm-hmm. And I see that they walk the talk, and it was something I wanted to be a part of. Right. And I also like the challenge. Again, I'm a deliberate discomfort guy. Right. So I was like, okay, these guys, so you're saying me they're the oldest franchise. They have the smallest market. This sounds like the Marine Corps at Major League Baseball I'm in. So that's what we call the Reds. We're the Marines, because the Marines are like, they're not, the Marines are not the Army or the Navy or the Air Force. They got all these big budgets, which is like the Yankees and the Dodgers, and they can go buy players, and, they got all the best shiny toys, and they could have previously as many affiliates as they wanted. Nope. Very small resources, and the most a restricted amount of resources is a really hotbed for a lot of creativity and innovation, and I think that's why I'm so excited, and great leadership. I'm just ready to go get back to baseball, man. I want to get in the arena.
Isn't that the truth?
Amen.
Yeah. I think, Andy, the other thing about this is that between the military and what you're working with professional athletes is there's a lot at stake. And so I think that's that commonality there that you have when you're talking about, and also discipline, routine, habits, all those things are important, just like they would be with the military service. Have you found that it's easier maybe to kind of, I know you've talked about the idea that there's still some things that people from a professional baseball standpoint, they may be talking a different language. I know that's one of the things that you're really trying to work on is that lexicon there to make sure everybody's on the same page. Yeah. How difficult has that been to kind of start to unpack some of these things for that organization as a whole?
Yeah. Not as difficult as I thought, because they're so open to getting better. And that's really refreshing as I'm making the rounds. I'm talking to people from the top down. I mean, like Nick Kroll to David Bell, down to, the rehab guy at an affiliate, right? I mean, when you're talking about the mental game, very, very open to it. I mean, obviously there's disparity levels of understanding and whatnot as well too. But like, I think gone are the day, at least in the Reds, so the Bob, by the way, Bob Rotella was like I keep talking about Bob Rotella. He was a consultant with the Reds for a long time. So. Yeah. The mental skills program is new to the Reds. So Tyler was the first hire. I'm the second hire. So relatively new. So surprising to me that they're so open, knowing that they've been very limited in terms of, and I think that's because I think that's also as a generational thing. A lot of the dinosaurs, who are like, oh, that's not how we did it when I was playing ball and I came up, right. And those guys are kind of starting to move up and on. They're starting to evolve or die type thing. I think the mental game of baseball has always been at a premium. Just how do we do that, and then what does that look like? And how do we scale an organization? So the scope and scale of mental skills training and Major League is a really interesting opportunity and a challenge when you're too deep. And I think that's why we're really doubling down on with our coaches, and we're using, and what a great opportunity to now everybody is comfortable using this remote learning thing.
Right.
You got guys our age who are like, we're digital immigrants. We're like, we got loaned our green card this last year.
Yeah.
What's the Zoom thing again? I turn this damn thing on. I got Becky's iPad up here on the thing. And so, you got even, everybody is familiar with this now too. Well, that now allows me to bridge the gap. Now the challenge is building relationships, because I like we talked about, I still don't think that, you can build trust and rapport at the speed you need to remotely if you were to build a relationship from scratch. But I think once you establish that trust and rapport, it's game on with remote stuff too. So I think you're going to see an acceleration of the acceptance and the ability to train the game in Major League Baseball. And I see a watershed event happening with other Major League sports.
For sure. Brandon, so one of the things that I think is important, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, is the idea that, there's so much there's a little bit of a stigma that I think is still out there as it relates to mental skills, mental performance, anything that you want to say. Brandon and I were talking about this afternoon about one of the challenges you probably have, especially in that minor league setting, is when those players are, they're very results focused, very much thinking about what, getting to the show, right? I just got to get up there and get to the show. That I wonder if there's a little bit of that, hey, I don't want to talk to this mental performance guy or this mental skills guy because I don't want the front office thinking I've got some issue. I don't want them thinking I can't handle adversity. What's that been like?
Yeah, no, it's a great point, because there is still a tendency to, I'm going to go see the mental skills guy when I get in trouble. Or the coach refers to me to the mental skills guy when I get unstuck and the coach is beyond his capacity to help. So it's become this default negative lens towards us, because we're the fixers, because everything's a problem that needs to be solved. I was talking to, I won't name his name, who went through the major leagues, and he was very open to the mental game, and he got frustrated because he had a mental skills coach on retainer, a guy that we all know. And, he was working the mental skills game, but then it kept on being this default from the front office and the coaching staff saying, well, you're just, you need to work on your mental game. The problem, it was a frustration. It's like, you clearly do not know me, because I have a mental skills guy on retainer. That's how I switched it on. So I think it's, for one, it's kind of, it's the filtering out process. It's the needs assessment, right? And so how does that referral process happen from the coaching standpoint? What are they coming to us for? But it's also us doing a good job marketing what we're there for. We're not only there for when you're going through your slumps and you're having a difficult time, but we're there to help accelerate and be that NOS to inject fuel into your performance when you're doing really well. So I think that the latter part of that is and when they can start to see the connection and the correlation between working with us and then they see the outcomes and they can make that connection, that's and then they start to tell everybody else in the clubhouse, the coaches see that starts to shift the paradigm, but that's going to take a little bit. And we're not there yet. But I think that's a byproduct of some of the other things we're doing fundamentally.
Well, and John and I have talked about this. It's so hard on the mental side to see the results sometimes, right? Yeah. You would never, as a player, decide that, I've got warning track power, I guess I'll go to get in the gym. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not a reaction to what's going on. It should be in addition to what you already have in your skill set. And to your point, it's also part of this is preventative,
right?
Because that 0 for 22 slump, maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe I cut that in half and I'm 0 for 10 if I know how to get it right between my ears. And so it's interesting. I love the fact that we have men like you in these positions because you have an extensive past. You've been able to see it as it evolved, and from our perspective, from where John and I sit, you're starting to see it get a little more mainstream. I mean, I'm having these types of conversations with my son's 13U baseball team, and just little pebbles in the shoe, just maybe something to aggravate them and keep in their mind, right, as we work between games. So I love the fact that it's out there and that we've got guys like you leading the way in this stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. I think we're shifting the paradigm. I think we're doing it. I mean, I've seen it in the military, which has been amazing. I mean, and I'm an artifact that now we're bleeding over to sports, which is really cool in the field because to see that I mean, I'm really passionate about building that bridge between the military and sports because I think they're so similar, obviously, but it's interesting that the largest employer of sports psychologists in the world is the U.S. Army. And it's not by chance that a lot of them have made their way into Major League Baseball, right? So the military has become this proving ground, just like the internet, just like, GPS, just like, these other amazing, evidence-based, research-based hardware things. Like it's amazing to see that, the military has informed professional sports and business about a way that you can get better and your team can get better.
Well, look at it this way. If you have in the military, and you've seen this firsthand, it's one thing to be on the firing range and shooting a rifle. It's another thing to be in Iraq shooting a rifle, because that stress relativity is there. Yep. It's the same thing with baseball players, just to use that sport as one example and not to, before anybody starts writing emails I'm not comparing those two things. Trust me. I don't want all of a sudden that's what's going to fill up our inbox of emails is the fact that John said he thought that baseball would say, I'm not saying that, but the reality of it is And this is what excites me about what you and Tyler are going to be doing with the Reds is I imagine there's going to be a level of stress that starts to get added into some of the drills and some of the things that they're going to be doing and moving forward in the future, because just like in the whether it's at West Point or whoever, when you have to start adding in those extra distractors so that now all of a sudden they're more prepared from an attention standpoint when everything's going crazy around them. And if you can get baseball players to start buying into that and they see that they're better when they play their best, when the game matters the most, it's going to be a really big deal, turning point.
Huge.
Yeah, you're right, and I think it's doing that the right way, doing it incrementally, and then dosing it, and then bringing them up, and then allowing the recovery to happen, and then the space for them to be like, all right, what was the change there, and they can see that, and I think, and you see some examples of that as well too. I mean, everybody was marveling the other day about Trevor Bauer. He struck the guy out, and he was with his eyes closed, and it was he struck him out with his eyes closed. Man, I bet you Trevor Bauer could strike a lot of people out with his eyes closed. He's done it so many times in his head, and then also physically and stuff like that too. So but how do you train to that level? Because baseball doesn't do that right now writ large. I can't speak for any other clubs, but practice is still very casual and it's comfortable and so on and so forth, right? And so it would be a mistake for me to new middle skills guy, I'm in the military drill sergeant guy comes in and starts hurling insults and, throwing crowd noise and, gunfire. No, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's because we did that with Rangers, but,
that's right.
But again, if it's dialing it up and then being able to then ramp it down, right. Cause I think, too much of that can be too much. And I think, I've seen great examples of that. I'll never forget going to the Seattle Seahawks practice and get a chance to hang out with Michael Gervais for a day. It just happened to be Military Appreciation Day, which is pretty cool. But I was so amazed that the art and science of competition, to where they got the DJ playing. It's very loose. But, man, those guys are just freaking getting after each other, man. And they were getting after each other playing ping pong before practice, and they were getting after each other in terms of talking trash about who got who and
right.
So and so forth after practice. And man, they were hitting hard. They were moving fast. And, and I think, and again, I mean, making practice has got to be so much harder that the game is easy. Are we there yet with baseball? I'm not sure, but I would like to not only do that from a very individual skill standpoint, but from a situational standpoint as well too. So stay tuned.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I love what you all are doing. I love the fact that you have demonstrated at each step along the way that, you can get through this deliberate discomfort. There's ways that you can prepare yourself. And in the midst of all of this, one thing we didn't get a chance to unpack, but we'll have to bring you back some other time and talk about is you were transitioning from active duty. Like, why not? Let's just throw that in there. What's another challenge, right? You were transitioning. So Tyler, I was thinking about Tyler Klein earlier. So
he's way better looking than I am. Smarter.
So let me ask you this question before we let you get off here. So right now I know that people can find you on LinkedIn, and I should mention to everybody, Andy Riise. Riise is actually spelled Riise. So for those of you who are wanting to Google, Andy, but on Instagram, you can find him at coach_Riise, Riise, and then also at Design to Perform. And then on Twitter at Andy.Riise or at Perform Design TO. And one thing I wanted to ask you is, you said there's a website, is it Soldiers In Sidelines or Soldiers On
Sidelines? Yep. Yeah, exactly. So
okay.
For anybody who's out there who knows a veteran who's interested in getting into coaching, and then send them that way too. I contribute to them and advocate for them big time. So.
Anything else you're working on that's kind of a little side passion project? Because Lord knows, you need something else on your plate right now, right?
I'm just really focused on being present and enjoying my family. It's been this has been the longest I've been around my family, ever.
Yeah.
And so it's been awesome, and I've been really enjoying that. And but I'm looking forward to just hitting the road and, and being a coach in the arena.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. In the arena, by the way, because if you follow Andy on social media, you'll see you in the arena. Where did that come from? Could you just tell us real quick about that?
I'm a huge fan of Theodore Roosevelt. He's one of my heroes, and read his memoirs, and I just think his exploits, are amazing. He's someone I would never want to be the president, but in terms of just the way he went about his craft, and when you go through West Point, you learn all these things from amazing leaders that not only went to West Point and created the history of our country, but one of the things we had to memorize was The Man in the Arena by Theodore Roosevelt, and I remember having to read that and recite it. It just really became part of my personal credo and who I was, because I think it takes a lot of courage to want to be able to lean into your craft and to make yourself better all the way around. And that's what the arena is all about. To me, integrity is super important. Walking the talk, speaking softly when carrying a big stick, like he talked about. And so to me, I want to bring as many people into the arena as I can to get out of their own damn way. And because we're all designed to perform, and I want to be a person who helps guide them get there.
Well, you're getting it done, brother. We can't thank you enough for everything that you've done for our country, but also just for everything you're doing right now for veterans and also for the Cincinnati Reds. Selfishly, I'll throw that in there.
Go Reds, baby.
Right. Thanks, Andy. We can't thank you enough,
Andy.
man.
Thanks,
Appreciate
guys.
you, man.
Want to provide feedback or stay up to date with the show? Visit our Instagram page at Mental Advantage Podcast, or you can send us an email at podcast@mentaladvantage.net. To have John Cullen work with you or your team, please write to him at john.cullen@mentaladvantage.net. Thanks for listening to today's episode.